Well, hello. Hope you're all doing great. Just me on my own today. My fellow gutterites are busy doing other weekend things. I finally got around to getting this article together that I've been wanting to read out for ages now, but I'm just too lazy and I procrastinate constantly. And I just thought, right, I've got a few hours spare. I'm going to sit down, pull this article out, and actually read it. Because I don't remember anyone actually ever going over this article. The Good Housekeeping article that David's birth mum, Betty Falco, gave to Good Housekeeping magazine in, I think, 1979. This picture was awesomely provided by Mr. Paul Hart because he's great at finding these obscure, hard to find articles, and the picture that originates with this on the People versus David Berkowitz, as you'll see, is very grainy. But this is a really clear picture of David with his birth mum and his half-sister Rosalind. You can see how happy he looks, but it's a great article because it gives so much insight into his mind, you know, just before the killing started and during the time. You can see like his descent into like madness. Like even his family around him are like, this dude's like losing his mind. And it goes into great detail. Like she gives her side of things, like what happened, because we've only really ever heard David's side. So if you like, it's really interesting to hear this article. It's really good. So I'm going to read it out to you, whether you like it or not. You don't have to watch, but I'm going to do it anyways. People might be new to the case. And like I say, I don't ever see it. I've never seen it being read before. So this is the article. If you want to read it yourself, it's on the People versus David Berkowitz. If you go to Berkowitz letters, psychiatric letters, you click on that and there's 4 files and it's in the first file. So if you scroll through the first file, it's in there somewhere. You just have to look for it. It's quite long, so it's going to take me quite a bit of time. But you're welcome to stay and listen to me read it. First time ever, the startling story of Son of Sam's real mother. So I believe, 1979, I think she gave this interview. David Berkowitz murdered 6 people and maimed 7. Not until he was caught did Betty Falco learn he was the son she'd given up 24 years earlier. By Susan Wishingrad. Betty Falco's life had never been easy, but little did she suspect as she listened attentively to the 7 a.m. news report on the radio that much worse was still to come. It was August 11th, 1977. More than a year since the killer known as the Son of Sam had begun his mad rampage through the streets of New York City with his .44 caliber revolver. Up to now, his score was 6 dead, 7 maimed, and as far as Betty knew, he was still on the loose. Like millions of other New Yorkers, Betty dreaded and hated this madman. She grieved for the people whose sons and daughters had been his victims. She feared for the lives of her own beloved children and grandchildren. For weeks and months, she had prayed fervently for his arrest. Now, on this fateful morning, she heard on the radio that her prayers had been finally granted. Son of Sam had been captured. His reign of terror was over. But her intensely felt relief was to only last a moment. Seconds later, when Betty Falco learned Son of Sam's true identity, her heart nearly stopped. David Berkowitz, the accused and self-confessed mass murderer, was her own flesh and blood, her natural-born son, Richard. It was unbearable. It was not even possible, but it was true. In the whole astonishing course of her relationship with her son, from their traumatic separation 24 years earlier to their emotional reunion many years later, nothing had prepared her for such a tragic turn of events. Not even her worst nightmares could measure up to the horrible reality that she suddenly had to deal with. This is her story. The daughter of an impoverished, non-English speaking Jewish immigrant, Betty grew up with 9 brothers and sisters in a poor section of Brooklyn. As soon as she was old enough, she had to leave school and earn her own keep. Her meager education prepared her for only the lowest paying factory jobs. When she met and married Tony Falco, the fact he was Italian and she was Jewish seemed no obstacle. Both worked for several years and ultimately invested their hard-earned savings in a fish store. When Betty became pregnant, she looked optimistically to the future. But her marriage to Tony was a mistake. In less than a year after she gave birth, Tony ran off with another woman, leaving Betty with an infant daughter to support as best she could. She never saw him again. Soon afterward, Betty met a man named Joe, Jewish, married with 3 children and a wife, who refused to give him a divorce. For the next 29 years, until his death, Joe would spend his free hours with Betty and then return home to his family every night. It was by no means an ideal relationship, but it helped him to fill the void. Joe was a stocky, powerful man with rough, often crude mannerisms, who appreciated Betty's passionate warmth and generosity and her values of decency and honesty. In his own way, he loved her, but he was a man of limited sensibility, and he arranged his life to suit his own best interests. So years later, when Betty became pregnant, Joe told her he would not give her a penny towards a baby's support. He would not tolerate the disgrace on an illegitimate child. Confused and full of fear, working full-time and bringing up her 13-year-old daughter Rosalind single-handedly, Betty could not imagine how she'd be able to raise another child. One of her neighbours came up with what at the time seemed the only possible solution. She told Betty about a fine Jewish couple she knew who could not have a child of their own. They would give Betty's as yet unborn baby all the care and love he deserved. Feeling she had no other choice, Betty consented to the arrangement. As she now explains that fateful decision, "I did it for Joe's children's sake and for mine, and because of the disgrace. It wasn't right, what I had done, and now I had to pay for it." Giving up her beautiful baby boy for adoption when he was only 4 days old was the hardest thing she ever had to do. On June 3rd, 1953, 2 days after giving birth, she left the hospital and reported to her daughter, her sisters, her brothers, and everyone close to her that little Richard David was ill and could not yet come home. On the 4th day of Richard's life, Betty returned to the hospital, dressed her baby, and held him for the last time, bathing him in her tears. She carried him out of the hospital and there, on the front steps, handed the infant over to a total stranger. The liaison between the families. It was all very legal and proper, but the love she was already felt for her newborn was almost overpowering, and it took all her strength to turn away from baby Richard, never to know what would become of him. She ran all the way home, her vision blurred by her tears. The baby had taken a turn for the worse, she told her family. He would never come home. He had died. Her daughter Rosalind has not forgotten how it felt to be told that the sweet baby brother, whom she herself had seen in the hospital, was gone forever. She had looked forward to welcoming him, helping care for him. "I cried and accepted it," Rosalind states matter-of-factly. "Did Betty have any regrets?" "Oh yes," says Betty, remembering her anguish. "One day, when I was alone with Joe, I just let go. I hit him and pounded on him. I was yelling, 'I'll kill myself if you don't bring back my son. I want my baby.' But of course it was too late. 17 months after she gave him up, formal adoption papers were processed, and Richard David Falco became David Richard Berkowitz, the son of Nat and Pearl Berkowitz. With time, the shock wore off, and for the next 22 years, Betty and Rosalind continued their struggle to survive. Although Betty worked hard, her income was barely adequate, and Rosalind was forced to leave high school after graduating to work in a series of factory jobs. She grew into a remarkably pretty and intelligent young woman, imbued with her mother's intense thoughtfulness and sincerity, wise beyond her years. After her marriage to Leo, a bus driver, a decent, generous man, Rosalind devoted herself to the work of a housewife and mother, trying to create for her 2 daughters an environment of love and warmth. When the girls grew older, she returned to work and volunteered as an attendant for the neighborhood ambulance corps. But always in the back of her mind, Rosalind had an instinctive suspicion that there was more to the story about her brother than she had been told. Years later, when Joe was dying, Rosalind, after persistent questioning, finally learned the truth from her mother, that she indeed still had a brother. At once, Rosalind was overcome with an impulse to find him. But my mother begged me not to track him down, she said. Don't destroy his life. You don't know what he knows. He's with the good family. Don't do it, I said. Okay, Ma, for you, I won't do it. And then suddenly, he came to us. It was May 12th, 1975, a day after Mother's Day. In her Brooklyn apartment house, Betty went downstairs to get her mail. Something extraordinary was waiting for her. An envelope folded over many times until it was small enough to push through a narrow slit in the mailbox. The words, "Private, Mrs. Betty Falco only," were written on the outside. Inside was a typical Mother's Day card, with a very untypical original poem written on the blank side in a neat, clear print. The poem said in part, "So, as once before, we've been destined to meet once more, and I guess the time is now. I should say hello, but how? Happy Mother's Day. You were my mother in a very special way. Love, R.F. Richard Falco." There was a phone number under the initials. The RF never rang a bell for Betty, but she called the number. As Betty remembers, the first words her son ever spoke to her, her voice fills with tenderness. He sounded like a little boy. "I'm your son, Richard Falco," he said. "You gave birth to me on June 1st, 1953. Minutes later, Rosalind received a call from her mother. She was completely hysterical. Rosalind recalls, she kept crying, "My son, my son, my son, it's my son." The anticipated reunion was surprisingly smooth. It was a thrill for Betty just to see him. Strong and healthy, his stocky build and dark, wiry curls reminiscent of Joe. His large blue eyes framed with striking, well-shaped brows, the image of her own. "He looked great to me," Betty says. He asked them to call him Richard, the name Betty had given him. Within weeks, they were calling him Richie. He explained from that day that he learned he was adopted. Finding his real parents had been his goal. Many times he had asked his father to give him the adoption papers. His father always refused. When Nat Berkowitz was about to move to Florida, he finally gave the papers to his son. David called every Falco in the phone book, asking for Betty and or Tony. He did research in libraries, poured through old phone books, compared them with new ones, imploring the phone company for information. He managed to at last to locate Betty at her Brooklyn apartment. Choosing not to ring her bell for the fear he would shock her, he placed his poem in her mailbox on Mother's Day. "He told me that he loved me," says Betty of the day they finally met, "and he forgave me. He said he knew I must have had a good reason for what I had done. He said his adoptive parents had been good to him. He told them his adoptive mother had died several years earlier, but he was still in constant touch with his adoptive father. The next months were a time for joyful celebration. Betty and Rosalind were proud of Richard and eager to show him off. He looked handsome, had a nice car, a good job, and was taking courses at a community college. Richard was particularly drawn to Rosalind. He made frequent trips between his apartment in the Bronx, his mother's in Brooklyn, and his sister's in Queens. Rosalind invited him for dinner often. He bought cake, cheese, soda, mugs, baskets. He was crazy about Rosalind's girls, Betty says. When they heard him ring the bell, they raced to greet him. Lynn, 9, would fly into his arms and he would kiss her. Wendy, 11, enjoyed his visits too. He helped me with my homework. He listened to records with me, and we talked and played games. She remembers. One day, the girls received 2 necklaces from him in the mail. When Wendy's broke, she refused to throw it out, mending it as best she could. She wore it for a long time because Uncle Richie had sent it. Rosalind once had to stay in hospital overnight for minor surgery. He came to visit me, she recalls. I was sleeping, and I remember I felt somebody kiss me. I opened my eyes, and there he was. In the summer of 1976, the family was shocked to read in the papers that on the night of July 29th, a sadistic maniac had murdered Donna Laura, 18, and wounded Jolie Valenti, 19. in the first of what would be an incredible series of shootings with a 44 caliber pistol. Betty and Rosalind caught their breath when they realized that 3 months earlier, Richard had lived in the neighborhood of the shootings. With a madman on the loose, they were grateful that he was now living safely in Yonkers. In the months following their reunion, Betty continued to see Richard as content and successful, but Rosalind began to sense that there was more to him that showed on the surface. I had an inkling of something, not 100%, but I felt he was just very lonely, mixed up. I would never put my finger on crazy. Shortly after they became acquainted, Nat Berkowitz called Rosalind. He felt strongly that David needed psychiatric help. He had seen David standing in front of a mirror, pounding his head with his hands. He begged Rosalind to see if she could get her brother to go for help. Rosalind tried, but was unable to convince David to get therapy. She offered to go with him, if that would help make it easier. But his response was always the same. I tried it, and they can't help me. I don't like talking to them. Soon after that, Nat Berkowitz called her again with an even more urgent problem. He was upset because David just called and told him that he was going to the doctor and he was going to die. There was something wrong with his head. Rosalind was stunned. She had heard nothing about this from Richard. She called Richard immediately and asked, "What is this about your head?" Richard answered, "Yeah, I probably have a tumor or something. I don't have too long to live. I'm going to go to the doctor." Rosalind asked if there was any way she could help. No, he assured her. There was no further discussion. When she called him the next day, she asked him if he had gone to the doctor. He said no, as if the whole thing never existed. On another occasion, when Rosalind was speaking to him on the phone, he said, "Do you hear that? Do you hear those dogs?" Rosalind acknowledged that she heard them. He told her that the super had 2 big dogs in the backyard that were barking all the time. "They're driving me crazy," he said. "Sometimes I think they're doing it just for spite, just to get me. When I come home, they know I have to sleep. They start barking." Then there was the phone conversation Rosalind had with Richard when he really seemed out of it. He was sort of giggling. I asked him what was the matter. He said, "Oh, nothing. They're out to get me, but they're not going to get me." I said, "Who is going to get you?" He said, "People, just people. I think my phone is bugged. I even think they bugged my car. They're out to get me. They're going to get me." Again, I asked, "Who? What makes you say this?" Just people. And then he said, "I have to go now." Rosalind assumed that he was merely high on something. It seemed the only logical deduction. Rarely did the depth of his unhappiness momentarily reveal itself. One evening, after a family dinner, Rosalind joined Richie in his car when he drove a relative to her apartment. On the way back, Rosalind and Richard did a lot of talking about themselves and their childhoods. When they reached Rosalind's block, they parked and continued to talk. He was out of work at the time and depressed. He felt very down and lonely. Then feelings he had held in so long overwhelmed him. He covered his face with his hands and started to cry. He cried for a long time. Sadness was evident again in another conversation. While briefly mentioning to his sister his army experience and the religious interest he had developed at the time under the influence of his Baptist friends, Richard also talked about the possibility of reincarnation and another life. He said he wished this time would come so he could go into a second life, Rosalind recalls. Perhaps their most significant conversation in terms of what the future would bring took place one day when Rosalind and Richard were having lunch together. Rosalind asked, "Richie, is there anything bothering you? You're so quiet." Richard replied, No, just my own problems. They'll all work out." Rosalind persisted. "Isn't there anything you want to tell me?" "No, it's something I have to handle by myself. But I want you to know one thing. I would never do anything to hurt you or your little girls," says Rosalind now. This, of course, went over my head. It never occurred to her that he might harm anyone, because no matter what bothered him, there had never been any sign of violence about Richard. For Rosalind, his outstanding trait was his gentleness. He had different moods, but then, who doesn't? There were times when the TV wouldn't bother him, at other times when it seemed too loud. He would never say anything, says Rosalind, but you could see his expression that he was annoyed. He would get up and make it lower. Sometimes the girls would irritate him. Wendy, for instance, would get on his nerves and he would quietly say, "Wendy, please." There were times, Rosalind recalls, when the girls could sit on him, kiss him and hug him. And then there were times where he'd get annoyed with their jumping all over him. With the gentlest gesture, he would indicate he'd had enough. Then he would go into the girls' rooms, lie down and sleep for about an hour. He was occasionally unhappy. He had his moods, but he was functioning and relating. Whatever eccentric habits the family saw in him seemed well within the range of acceptable behavior. Late in the evening, the family couldn't help noticing that a restlessness came over him. Very often, he would go out for walks that lasted up to 2 hours. He said he liked to walk. He often took walks with Leo and with Wendy and Len. How were they to imagine that when he walked alone, he was stalking neighborhoods, she later admitted to interrogators. They knew that he liked to drive and that he drove a great deal. They did not know that he drove all the way to Texas in 3 days in June of 1976 and returned with a .44 caliber pistol. They knew that the barking dogs annoyed him. They never dreamed he would one day interpret the barking as a message from the devil, ordering him to kill. They knew he liked maps and kept a large quantity of them in his car. When Rosalind's bank was giving out folders of maps, her first thought was, "I've got to give this to Richie. He's got a lot of maps." She could never have foreseen the day when David Berkowitz, the son of Sam's suspect, would be explaining to interrogators how he used these maps to know access route to the scenes of the crimes. On the night of Berkowitz's arrest, the police described the back of his car as a garbage heap. Photographs of his apartment showed a sloppy, filthy bachelor pad with piles of pornographic literature, sheets all over the windows, and malicious graffiti covering the walls. With this other side of his life, so obviously psychotic, couldn't the family have seen for themselves the true depth of his illness? No. As Betty and her family knew him, he was immaculate. His clothes were few and simple, but always spotless. His fingernails so clean you couldn't help but noticing them. He carried a toothbrush with him so he could brush after every meal. His car was a special source of pride to him. Often, when he visited Rosalind, he spent hours working on his car or polishing it. Afterwards, greasy and sweaty, he'd shower and put on a clean shirt. Rosalind rode in the car with him on innumerable occasions. It was always immaculate inside, shining out. She never saw it any other way. Didn't the family have an opportunity to glimpse at any of Didn't the family have the opportunity to get a glimpse of any of his apartments? Hadn't they ever been inside the killer's lair, as one newspaper headline had called it? While he still lived in the Bronx, they occasionally mentioned their curiosity to see his place. He would put them off, saying, "Oh, you don't want to go in there. It's not a nice neighborhood." In April 1976, when he was moving to Yonkers, they offered to help him. Politely but firmly, he turned them down. "I know Leo's tired. I'll just get some friends to help me." In the 2 years they knew him, they never once saw the way he lived. There was only one time Rosalind actually felt uneasy in relation to her brother. While describing this incident and seeing it for the first time in its true light, the full horror suddenly hit her. It was Thanksgiving night, November 25th, 1976. Richard, as usual, was part of the family gathering. After watching the 11 o'clock news, he said goodnight and left. About 10 minutes later, Rosalind recounts, he came back and said, I can't make a home in this traffic. It's bumper to bumper. I can't get home in this. I remember Leo saying to me, I can't imagine what kind of traffic there is at this hour. Well, I told Richie to stay here and go home in the morning. Wendy was with my mother, so we slept in the room of Lynn. At this point in her narrative, Rosalind stopped momentarily. Her entire body seemed to shiver. When I think of it, my God. I was very restless that night, she continues. I don't know why, but I felt strange and I didn't sleep at all. Then I heard Richie get up and go into the living room and lie down on the couch. Then he was in the kitchen. I remember he was eating. He had had all the food out of the refrigerator, stuffing, the cranberry sauce. Then he left very early in the morning. A Son of Sam suspect, David Berkowitz, was to explain later. It gets dark and I can't sleep. When I'm home, I have to go out. I know what has to be done. I am told all day. It becomes a matter of routine. Go out, clean the 44. Go out hunting. The spirits are watching, riding. I wouldn't do it, I didn't want to kill somebody. I tried to fight it. Were there demons making him restless that night? Was his story about bumper-to-bumper traffic a desperate attempt to resist their bloodthirsty demands by seeking refuge in his sister's apartment? If so, the respite was only temporary. For the very next night, on November 26, 1976, a Son of Sam shot and severely wounded Joanne Lamino and Donna Damasi in the Glen Oaks section of Queens, on a street 7 blocks from Rosalind's apartment. By the end of November 1976, the police had begun to link the original Bronx shootings of July 29th with the one in Flushing in October, and with the two in Glen Oaks in November. Soon to follow were the murders of Christine Freund in Forest Hills on January 30th, 1977, and Virginia Voskerichian, also in Forest Hills, in March of 1977. All the 1977 shootings occurred within easy reach of Rosalind's apartment, a short walk or drive away. Because of their proximity to the crimes, Rosalind and Betty were terrified. Every time Betty spoke to her daughter, her final words were a mother's warning. Watch the kids, stay at home. The thought of Sam was never far from Rosalind's mind. Fearing for her children and herself, she waited anxiously for his arrest. Whenever there was a report on Sam's latest attack, she prayed, I hope they catch him. I hope they catch this maniac. She studied the police sketches carefully, but they never gave her the slightest reason to suspect her own brother. Strangely enough, the subject of the Son of Sam never came up while they were with Richard. They never happened to mention it. He never said a word, but as the Son of Sam murders mounted, they heard from him less, and his visits, once so satisfying, were no longer quite the same. He was there one time, Rosalind recalls, and a neighbor's dog was barking. He said, how can you stand that? They have dogs here too. I said, it doesn't bother me. It only barks sometimes. In February 1977, a few days after Christine Freund was murdered, Richard called Rosalind and asked if he could borrow $10. He had just started a job at the Bronx post office, but the policy was to hold back a week's pay and he needed some cash. Rosalind says, that was the last time he came here, to pick up $10. He mailed the $10 back to me 2 or 3 weeks later. I called him after the money came in the mail and tell him I'd received it. I called him many times, inviting him to join us for dinner. He told me he was very busy and tired after work. He'd let me know which days he had off, but he never called again. The next time I saw him, he was in jail. Early in March 1977, Rosalind and her family began planning for their traditional Passover Seder dinner. They wanted Richard to join them, as he had the previous year. Wendy and Len were particularly eager for his company. They all took turns calling him day after day at all hours. They were unable to reach him, and in great disappointment, they celebrated Passover without him. For David Berkowitz had finally lost all contact with the people he cared most about, and was by this time, as a son of Sam, hopelessly enmeshed in the web of horror that his psychosis had created. On April 17th, the 44 caliber killer murdered Valentina Siriani and Alexander Iso. On January 26th, he shot and wounded Judy Placido and Sal Lupo. And on July 31st, Stacy Moskowitz was murdered and Robert Violante severely maimed. During the first week of August, the most massive manhunt in New York City history was on for the 44 caliber killer. Rosalind and Betty, like millions of other frightened New Yorkers, had their ears glued to the news reports, hoping for the only good news: Son of Sam's capture. On August 11th, very early in the morning, Betty was listening to the radio as she prepared breakfast. Then she heard what she was waiting for. They had captured the Son of Sam. Her reaction was ecstatic. I was thrilled. I was jumping up and down. They got him. They got him. Then I heard the name. Berkowitz. David. Pine Street. Betty's voice is suddenly quiet and the large blue eyes reflect the terror and disbelief at that moment. What was I hearing? There must be some crazy mistake. On first impulse, she called a close relative. He too had heard and had been startled by the radio report. Betty kept protesting. I don't believe it. It can't be. Not Richie, not my son. A cold-blooded monster. You would have to be an animal. Almost simultaneously, Rosalind received a phone call from another relative who informed her David was just picked up as a son of Sam. Still groggy from sleep, Rosalind, like her mother, could only deny it. She insisted there must have been a mistake. Then she turned on the TV to the 7 a.m. news. At first, there was only the bulletin. They had caught the Son of Sam. Then the name, David Berkowitz. His picture came on. Suddenly, it all hit me. My first thought was, my mother, my God, I have to get to my mother before she sees this. She rushed over to her mother's house. But when Betty opened the door, Rosalind knew right away she was too late. Betty was in shock. In the next few weeks, Betty listened, read, and watched in disbelief as headline stories, pictures, and letters were published in the profusion, all ostensibly describing her own son, but only resembling anyone she knew, heartlessly abandoned as an infant, adopted, and never got over it, a recluse living in his own sick world with no normal relationships, a slob living in his squalor Yonkers apartment. Front page photos showed his cherubic face with its gloating smirk. The Son of Sam letters, previously kept secret by the police, were now revealed to the public. Betty read them, ugly words full of hate and self-condemnation. I am a monster. I am a little brat. I am Beelzebub. I feel like an outsider. I am on a different wavelength than everybody else. Programmed to kill. Betty heard the noted psychiatrist, Dr. David Abrahamson, describe her son as shrewd, cunning, and sadistic. Another psychiatric doctor, Gabriel Coase, said of Berkowitz, he had to be unable to relate to other people. Someone able to love would not kill in this way. And psychologist Salvatore Deodato, who had worked with the police in the case, stated, one of the outstanding things here is the isolation of this man. Perhaps if he had someone to talk to, his anger would have drained off and he would not have killed. We can't live without love. Betty and her family were especially shocked to hear David Berkowitz say of himself in conversations with his hospital psychiatrist, I've been reduced. I lost human qualities. I'm not human anymore. I have no feelings, no compassion for the human race, no real concern. These images of a killer all made sense, but they did not sound like their beloved Richie. Yet in his letters to the family after his arrest, he denied nothing. His first letter, addressed Dear Leo, Ros, Wendy, Len, and Mum, said in part, "I'm sorry for the things that happened to you as a result of me. Just remember the good times we've had when we were together. Roz, Mom, I miss your wonderful cooking. Leo, I miss talking to you. I wish there was some way I could make you happy. Please take care now. Love, Richie." Betty strongly sympathized with the rage and indignation of the public her son had terrorized, but she felt repelled by the wave of hostile threats that inundated the hospital where he had been held. The public saw the tragedy only from the side of the victims. The press was eagerly fanning the flames of revenge. As Berkowitz himself so accurately expressed it, people don't want to deal with the complexities of it. They just want revenge, justice. That's all there is to it. It's a simple matter. But it was not so simple for Betty Falco and her family, who knew that there was a human side to the son of Sam. It was the only side they had ever known. Now suddenly this family, for whom life had been so orderly, was engulfed in a bewildering swirl of events. Rosalind, drawing on an inner source of strength and wisdom that she never knew she had, helped her mother through the initial shock and guilt feelings. Rosalind broke the news to her two young daughters, and that was particularly hard. How do you tell them that their loving relationship they had enjoyed with their Uncle Richie would exist no more? And how do you explain, two girls of 13 and 11, the terrible reason why? At first they were frightened and worried for him. Will he be in jail? Will they hit him? Will they beat him? Rosalind assured them that he was in a hospital and doctors were trying to make him better. The girls were upset for a long time. Their nights were filled with terrible dreams. Hordes of reporters mobbed Rosalind's doorstep in the next few weeks, rang her bell and called her continuously on the phone. She dodged and fended them off, often obliged to drive around the block for an hour until the coast was finally clear. She learned to ignore the hate mail that was coming in. Finally, she had to hire a lawyer to protect her family, and then another lawyer to protect her from the first one, who turned out to be untrustworthy. But most difficult of all was facing up to the reality of what Richard had done and trying to live with it. Inevitably, they wondered how it had happened, and if they, his mother, sister, brother-in-law, and two nieces, were in any way to blame. From the day Richard found them, they had unhesitantly welcomed him and shared with him their food, their love, and their companionship. Had this love come into his life 22 years too late? Or was it something about his upbringing or his army experience that had forced him to use guns, although he had written in a letter to a friend, "I don't want to learn to kill my fellow man"? Or were the drugs and LSD he admitted taking while in the service in some way responsible? All his life he had looked forward to finding his biological family, yet the murders did not begin until after he found them, only 1 year later. Was the relationship with his family responsible for triggering the acts of violence? In his search for his parents, he had found only his mother. Could the fact that his biological father was no longer alive and the further fact that he was illegitimate have left him feeling like a son of nobody? In a letter he left at the scene of one of his crimes, he referred to himself as son of Sam. The real Sam, Sam Carr, was a neighbour in Yonkers, but in Richard's disordered mind, Sam was an evil person, thirsty for blood, and his dog, by its barking, relayed to Richard the orders to kill. Sam was clearly a father figure, said one psychiatrist. Was the gap inside Richard so devastating that only a fantasy world was he able to find his father he needed? Son of Sam had written, "I am anxious to please Sam. I love my work. Now the void is filled." When Rosalind was on voluntary ambulance duty only a few weeks after Richard's arrest, a call came in about a young woman who had just been shot some time earlier and had just gotten worse. A different ambulance responded to that call, but when Rosalind heard that the patient was one of Son of Sam's victims, she turned white. Her knees began to shake under her, and she felt sick. She thought to herself, God, don't ever let me see this girl. God forbid I should ever get that call. I wouldn't want to see her, and I have to think that he did this. Numb with dread, Rosalind went to the King's County Hospital to see her half-brother. Of this first visit, Rosalind says, it was terrible, it really was. I just looked at Richie, but of course, I kept thinking to myself, my God, I'm sitting here face to face with the Son of Sam. They spent most of the visit discussing his legal problems. He did not want to be declared incompetent, nor did he wish to plead innocent by reason of insanity. He wanted to plead guilty and go to trial. A trial was crucial to him. He was adamant about wanting to get the true story out so people would know that David Berkowitz was, as he explained to his psychiatrist, a nice guy, a loving person, basically a peaceful person who didn't want to kill but was forced to by the howling demons who tormented him. He insisted that Sam the Devil would soon be victimizing other people, creating new Sons of Sam, and that he wanted to warn the world of this danger. He spoke briefly about his discomforts in the hospital. He was particularly bothered by the fact that he wasn't allowed to brush his teeth more than once a day and couldn't use shampoo for his hair. He had to use a brown soap which, for his fastidious taste, was not efficient enough. On her next few visits with Richard, Rosalind had to limit her time to half an hour. After that, he was no longer able to maintain normal contact. He became restless and agitated. He jammed his fist into his cheek and rubbed it round nervously. He thrust his head forward and shifted his eyes from side to side, as if someone was chasing him. When Rosalind asked, "Would you like me to go now?" he answered yes, with obvious relief. Betty's first visit with her son did not take place until October 31st. One thing that kept them apart was concern about the emotional effect such a visit would have on Betty, whose health was poor. Another thing was fear that once reporters might hound them again. Once news of the impending visit leaked out, it was imperative to postpone Betty's visit until some of the feverish feelings had cooled down. By October 31st, Rosalind and the lawyers agreed it would be safe to arrange a meeting between mother and son. The visit was brief and pleasant, though somewhat strained. Although glad to see her again, Richard found it hard to look at his mother directly in the eyes. She brought him some books and some stationery. They spoke only about the most superficial things. At the end of the visit, still not looking at her, he said quietly, "Well, Ma, how do you like this mess I'm in?" It was as if he could barely comprehend it to himself. When Rosalind and her mother returned home, they found the apartment complex once again swarming with reporters, and the doorbell rang all night long. During November, Rosalind continued to visit him whenever possible and witnessed his steady physical and mental deterioration. He lost a great deal of weight. His eyes, under line of heavy black bags, sank into his pale face. The present David Berkowitz, who looked like a sickly old man, barely resembled the robust, blue-eyed young man who had only been arrested months before. He experienced recurrent episodes of shrieking, ranting, and flaying, which the hospital treated with straitjackets and heavy sedation. He continued to be tortured by his demons. He pleaded desperately to his lawyers, "Please help me." And to his sister Rose, he said, "I don't think I can make it through this." During one of his more calm and rational periods, in November 1977, he wrote to his mother saying that these were the hardest, loneliest days of his life because it was doubtful if he could ever be able to spend time with her and the family again. Early in December, Richard came to a shocking awareness. After half a year of confinement and treatment, the demons were fading away. He suddenly understood that he had done something really terribly wrong, that he had killed all those people for no good reason. As the reality of what he had done penetrated his consciousness, he found he could not bear to live with himself. In the next few tension-filled weeks, both the lawyers and the two families dealt with the very possibility that he might attempt attempt to commit suicide. But unpredictable as always, Richard gradually adjusted, coming to terms with himself and his future. How did this come about? An influence from his past re-entered his life, giving him strength to survive. His next letters to his family were imbued with his new obsession. In January 1978, he wrote his mother, "I want to talk to you about God and your future," and urged her to put herself in God's hands. About the same time, he wrote to Roz and Leo that he'd been busy reading his Bible and praying. In February 1978, he wrote his mother that something wonderful had happened in his life. He had found the Messiah of Israel, Jesus Christ. "And we love each other. That's right. I believe Jesus is the Savior of the world for both Jews and Gentiles. And with this, I have a new hope. In fact, I have a great hope that you will one day find Christ and get saved. I know it's hard to fathom now, yet I am certain that one day Miss Betty Falco will shine as a light in the darkness to all her Jewish friends. I am certain that in the years to come, your mum will become a Christian. Love you forever, Richard." During the rest of the winter, Betty did not dare visit her son again because of the hard time the press gave her after the first visit. Rosalind was unable to get back to him for a long time. After 8 months of psychiatric examinations, judicial hearings, appeals and delays, he was still in his cell at Kings County Hospital, awaiting for a decision about his future. On March 21st, 1978, Rosalind was allowed to spend a full hour with him. For months, he had been visited by no one except his lawyers and a woman Baptist who came to him twice a week for a Bible study session. He was truly thrilled to see his sister. During the visit, he was very emotional and cried often. Every few minutes, he asked about the kids and told me how he missed them. He kept saying, "I miss you, I love you, I think about you and Mum and the girls every night, and I cry." Now there were no more demons, continues Rosalind. He was no longer nervous or tense. He really seemed like himself again. Even though he was no longer tortured by demons, he was suffering. His suffering was even worse now because he realized what he did, how horrible it was. He knows what he did was wrong, and he is sorry for it. He can't express enough how sorry he is. He keeps saying it over and over and over, and he cries. I tried to tell him, "You weren't really yourself. You couldn't help yourself." Then he held up his hands and said, "But these two hands did it." Again, I told him, "You weren't in control of your hands," but he feels completely responsible. He did not want the onus of responsibility removed from his shoulders by a verdict of innocence by reason of insanity. The suggestion of insanity was always a sore point with him. He denied it from the start. He told his psychiatrist that the demons were real, too real to be called delusions. "I don't feel insane," he told Rosalind. He wanted to plead guilty and go to prison. It appeared to Rosalind that what held him together, for that moment at least, was his belief in Jesus and his passion to make believers of everyone he knew. "I love you," he told Rosalind. "Jesus loves all of us. We are still a family even though we can't be together anymore." Then he implored her, "Please try and believe in Jesus, because when we die, we'll all be in heaven together as a family." He was not blind to the bleakness of his future. "My life is over," he admitted to Rosalind. And he was also aware of the risks if he went to regular prison, where he would be a hated inmate. "I don't know what my chances are in prison," he said to Rosalind. "I know there are a bunch of coops there." In his last letter to the family before his day in court, Richard was immersed more deeply than ever in his religious thoughts. He wrote of the woman minister who come to read the Bible with him and quoted Psalms 27. "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear?" Psalms 31. "In thee, O Lord, do I put my trust. Let me never be ashamed. Deliver me in thy righteousness." Psalms 38. "For I declare mine iniquity. I will be sorry for my sin." He concluded, "I hope these passages will bless your life. Dearest family, love Richard. Love Rishi." On May 8, 1978, David Berkowitz, against the advice of his lawyers, pleaded guilty to all the .44 caliber shootings. His plea was accepted by all three judges. Once again, the media described him as a coldly, unemotional, speaking in a monotone, showing no remorse. Once more, the public was presented with the image of a one-dimensional fiend. For his victims' families, who had experienced only the terror of his demonic side, the only true justice would be the death penalty. Ironically, Rosalind had begun to agree with them. The year-long ordeal had taken a severe physical and emotional toll on her mother. For the second time, Betty was losing her son, and this time forever. Betty was surviving, but just barely, by clinging to the hope that her son had at least found peace in his new religion. But Rosalind did not have much faith that he found a really permanent peace in his obsession with Jesus. Rather, she saw his new religion in much the same way defense psychiatrist Dr. Lubin saw it, just another aspect of his psychosis. Her instincts told her that his idea about his new mission in life to preach the gospel to other prisoners was just another form of hallucinations that were a fundamental symptom of his whole mental disorder. Even as early as May 8th, there were indications that the slim thread by which he was holding on to his sanity was beginning to break. In episodes witnessed by psychiatrists, Richard had uncontrollable fits of rage whenever he felt he was losing his grip on Jesus. He had even begun to doubt the trustworthiness of his beloved lady minister. Rosalind did not believe there was any possibility for a cure for her brother, or any way for him ever again to lead a meaningful or happy life. Above all, Rosalind understood with compassion the bitterness and grief that led the victims' families to desire her brother's death. I look at my own two girls, she said, quietly in the weary aftermath of legal hearings, and I wonder, how would I feel if the same thing happened to me? I think I would probably feel exactly the same way. But the death penalty does not exist in New York State, and the living reality of their nightmare will always remain a part of Rosalind and Betty's lives. On July 5th, 1978, almost a full year after his arrest, David Berkowitz was declared insane by the court and sentenced to a term of 25 years to life for each of his victims. Once a year, perhaps more often than they find the strength and the money, Rosalind will escort her mother on the 5.5-hour trip upstate to Richard's prison home, and there they will again relieve the pain of the past. Between visits, they try to continue the business of living, raising a family, struggling with everyday problems, enjoying life's simple pleasures. But how can Rosalind totally block out of her mind her brother's tragically wasted life and his horrendous legacy? How can Betty ever forget what her son once meant to her? She knows she is not his mother in the legal sense. At the time of his arrest, she had known him only for 2 out of his 24 years. Nonetheless, in that brief period, he became a son to her. She felt close to him and loved him. Her bond to him was too strong to be rationalized out of existence. The fact that he was now one of the most hated and infamous criminals of all time could not alter her motherly instincts, her deep attachment. On the day he pleaded guilty to 6 murders, David Berkowitz entreated his lawyers to help him purchase a Mother's Day card to send to Betty, as he had done every year since he found her. He wanted to wish her a happy Mother's Day. Betty Falco found it in her mailbox on May 13th, 1978. It was a simple, elegant card and a handwritten message. Dear Mum, please remember that I love you and I will always love you. And throughout eternity, I will never forget you. Love, Richard.